Hi and welcome to our Hate Crime Awareness webinar. Um, my name is Derek Sankar. I'm the BDB Community Engagement Coordinator, and we'll be running a series of webinars around inclusion, community engagement. And as this week is National Hate Crime Awareness Week, we thought we'd run a session on hate. I should say that I have worked within the hate crime industry for a fair while, supporting people as they disclose incidents of crime, reviewing cases. I've advocated for clients on complex cases and followed afterwards. I have also worked with communities to develop their own kind of community response to crime. Just a quick word of warning in this session, we'll be using, because of the nature of the session, there might be some sensitive words or situations discussed here. So it's best if you have, as I know lots of people are working from home, if there are little children around, it's probably better if they're not able to hear the discussion and the phrases, words, scenarios that we're talking about. Using headphones. So aims of the session, to understand what hate crime is, I'll give a really brief historical context and some of the legal framework behind hate crime. And I won't go into detail, but there is a reason why I'm trying to do that legal framework as well. I want to explore why it matters and why it's different from other crimes. There's a really big difference. And then, of course, to understand how to report hate crime, and when you do report hate crime, and there's lots of options, lots of ways that you can do it, what to expect and ask for when you have reported. And finally, to begin to feel confident in supporting those people who've been targeted by hate crime. Okay, I'm going to share with you really short video, and you can hear it.
Forms of hate have experienced name calling, the usual faggot, puff,
bag, nutty, grab, like goth, like emo, and that's kind of not even without even speaking to me. They'll just see me and go, "Oh, grab."
Another one is go back home where you came from. Well, this is my home. I live here. Where else can I go?
You get, when you go into a shop and you pay for something, they take the money off you and then give the change to the person with you, because they don't see you. I'm there, I'm 20 stone plus, I'm 3 feet wide, and people don't see me. It's quite ridiculous. What else can you say? I'm the invisible man.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about why we consider hate crime. So any of us can be a target for any kind of hate crime. And the people we're working with, the people we support, can be a target for any kind of hate crime. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about disability hate crime. And my assumption is that a lot of the people that we support, that we work with, will or may be targeted by disability hate crime. So it's worth mentioning that over the last 9 years, disability hate crime has increased by 405%. Last year, there were 8,469 reports to the police. That was a 9% increase from the following year. But shockingly, so this is data from the police service, there is a crime survey for England and Wales, which asks different questions and is more accessible to more people. That survey estimates that there's a total of 70,000 disability hate crimes. Yeah. So the number of hate crimes is dramatically underreported. And then a survey by I'm with Sam found that 73% of disabled people experience, and most of them would have experienced it in the last year. Hate crime starts here, really. So hate crime starts with Stephen Lawrence. Most of you will be aware of Stephen's murder, and the investigation that followed was full of mistakes or just poorly investigated, and Stephen's mother had to go back to the police and keep taking bits of information that was ignored. Eventually she pushed for an independent review, which was the person report. That review came up with 70 recommendations, and within 2 years there were changes to the law. Some of those changes included the Independent Police Complaints Commission. So before the Macpherson report, there wasn't an independent body investigated police complaints. The abolition of the double jeopardy can be trialled for the same thing twice if new evidence comes up. Really important for us at the moment is the definition of a racial incident and introducing the idea of hate crimes, and also a recognition that there's such a thing as institutional racism. And that the police service, there was a huge amount of institutional racism, not just in the police service, but in a lot of institutes at the time. But what's hate crime? We're using the Macpherson report to give us this definition. Any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a person's race or perceived race, religion or perceived religion, sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation, disability or perceived disability, or against a person who is transgender or perceived to be transgender. So you don't have to be have a particular disability to face disability hate crime. You don't have to be gay to face homophobic hate crime. Also be about. And before this definition came into place, the person who had the power to define whether an incident was hate or hate crime or not would have been the police service. So this is all about putting power into giving power to the person who's been targeted. So putting us as ordinary people at the centre of reporting and so on. If anyone has any thoughts about that definition, so I'll say it again because you couldn't see it. But a hate crime is any criminal offence perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a person's race, religion, sexuality, or perception of that. Oh, I can see that. It's been shared. Wonderful. Can everyone else see that?
Yes, can.
Right. So if we can go down to what is a hate crime?
Just quickly, just so people can just see some of the stats that we went through.
And you will get copies of these slides. They'll be added to the website.
So the key in this definition is that someone has to perceive that it's being motivated by hostility due to one of those reasons, race, orientation. So if I see an incident happening in front of me, if I think that's been motivated by race, religion, or any of those, I can report it as a hate crime. The person being targeted thinks they're being targeted because of one of their characteristics. They can report it as a hate crime. Yeah. Okay. So if we go on to the next one, please. So what is exactly a hate crime? Now, often, if we're thinking about it, we'll think of assault, harassment, theft. Think crimes like this. There isn't actually a hate crime by itself. So hate crime is added on to any other crime, but there has to be a hate motivation. And in order for it to be reported and monitored by the police, that hate motivation has to be one of these categories, the ones that over gender identity, faith, religion, sexual orientation, race, etc. So it's an add-on to an ordinary crime. There are some services in the country that monitor other strands, so beyond this. So Greater Manchester and Leicester, Nottingham, and I think that 9 other services would monitor alternative subculture. So that's the goth thing, and that's after the death of Sophie Lancaster and campaigned by her mother. Barking and Dagenham monitor age as a hate crime, and there's a lot of discussion in the news at the moment around having misogyny named as a hate crime, and some resistance to it. But at the moment, Nottingham and North Yorkshire monitor misogyny as well. So I just want to say briefly that hate crime and discrimination, there is an overlap here, and they can both be the more overt forms that I've mentioned, or they can be a bit more covert. So subtle expressions of hate, subtle hate crimes incidents can be things like dumping rubbish outside somebody's home or through the letterbox, bullying in school or in the workplace, over familiar questioning, which is and if that continues, it can become harassment. And I think possibly a number of people with certain disabilities face that on a really regular basis, that assumption that you ask really personal questions because I have a disability. And abuse of support animals, things like that. It can be really subtle and even unconscious. And we go into more detail about subtle discrimination on the Eggshells webinar that we'll be running in a couple of weeks. So a hate incident, slightly different to a hate crime. Starts off the same. Any incident is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility and prejudice based on the person's same things, race, perceived race, etc. All those characteristics. One extra criteria. One more press of the button, please. And it doesn't breach criminal legislation. It's as simple as that. So it's the same. It's a hate incident if it doesn't break the law. And we don't need to decide whether something has broken the law. We can report it. We report it to the police and we say we perceive it to be a hate crime or hate incident, so they should monitor it as a hate crime, hate incident. The police's job to decide whether it breaks the law or not. So they'll decide incident or crime. Yeah? And if you don't want to go to police, there are other places to report. So we'll take a quick check-in. So as we're quite a small number, really happy to take questions as we're going along, but I will also stop and pause, just check in, see if there are questions, things you'd like to be doing, things you'd like to know more about that we've covered, things that you want to ensure that we do cover. You can either use the chat or unmute.
Eric, can I just ask something? I know, obviously, if somebody falls into one of those groups, if somebody was obviously being victimised but didn't fall into one of those groups, how would it be looked at then? Would that still be considered as hate crime?
Depends who you're talking to. Talk to the police. They won't label it as hate crime because they're not monitoring anything. If you go to somewhere like Stop Hate UK, they will monitor any incident that's motivated by a person's personal characteristic, colour of hair. It'll be monitored as a hate crime. The legislation behind it, what you can do about it, isn't really there. It becomes antisocial behaviour, harassment, things like that. So you have to dip into other. If it's happening within an organisational setting, so a college, a business, so on, then you can get a bit of leverage by going to an organisation like Stop Hate UK. You then say, name it as a hate crime, and that can push that organisation to take. Is that, yeah. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? How are people feeling about that definition, perception, by the victim or any other person?
Sorry. I find it quite interesting that obviously with the at the moment, obviously everything's quite big on institutionalized racism for a police department to be able to choose what they class as breaking the law or perceive it as possibly just an hate crime and can push it to the side. I suppose that's quite interesting.
So I guess I do know of people who've used solicitors. So the police have said it's not a crime, it's an incident. The police should always monitor it as a hate assault. If you say it is a hate incident, it should be monitored like that. It's worth bearing in mind that if you talk to an officer, I'll say this later on, but if you talk to a police officer, they're only likely to come across 1 or 2 hate crimes, hate incidents in their entire career. And they will only have had training similar to this around what hate crime is. So at some point they'll understand the law, but that would have been in their training process. Then they'd have spent years actually doing the job, maybe had a refresher. So it's easy. Often people recognize race as a hate thing. Transgender is is increasing rapidly, so getting recognized more. Sometimes it's a real struggle to have disability hate crime recognized as a hate crime. You have to really say, remind them that it's named, it's monitored, and they should be recording it.
I think that's one of the things I was thinking when I was watching the video, kind of the difference between hate and discrimination. And I think, looking at the guy who went into the shop and got the change, but they gave the change to somebody else. That's something that we see a lot within Ulstrom UK, because we support people that are deaf blind, and you kind of, we've seen people, I've seen it with my own son, that, even just giving his own name when he goes into a hospital, but the people tend to look to me to answer, and I then, look to say to Keon, you give your details. I don't necessarily see that as hate. I see it maybe as ignorance, but I suppose it's, I think that's something that we all probably see with the people that we're supporting within our organisations. If anybody had any thoughts on that, really.
Anyone want to respond to that? People agree with that? Sheila.
Hi there. I'm just sharing some of the things that Kerry, you've just said, that you're not sure if it's ignorance or is it hate, or I went through a similar experience when I started a new job at an organization, and being different from the same community but being slightly different, not apparently coming in the same normal perception that people had. I had lots of questions that people were asking, and I had to answer them. To begin with, I thought, okay, this is something that we're getting to know each other, people are interested, the person's new. But then the questions carried on for a long time and in different forms. So it's almost like I felt that the person wasn't satisfied and felt this can't be right, this does not fit the perception. And so the questions just carried on until I did actually get very uncomfortable. And I thought, okay, now this doesn't seem right. And that feeling that you get at that point is enough to tell you that this is not acceptable. I think you do tend to know after a while whether it's ignorance. It's a lot of things about body language. It's the way it's asked, where it's asked, how many times it's asked, and what kind of examples people are giving along the way in the conversations. So, there is such a fine line. And then, when I had that doubt whether this is more than just getting to know, more than this ignorance, it turned out to be, it was 50-50. There was ignorance. There was a lot of other hidden feelings that the person was trying not to show, but it was coming through. So it is there, but it's just finding the right balance and being aware yourself. The more aware we are, the more we can respond in a way that we can stop it a little bit, going further, and showing the resilience is really important, I think. I don't know if that is what you was feeling like, or.
Thank you. Does anyone want to add to that?
Completely, yeah, that makes complete sense. I think something else as you were talking there that came to mind is, when within Breaking Down Barriers, we're working a lot with organisations to help them to improve engagement with people from diverse communities. And, and I suppose one of the things we always say is if you're not sure, ask, and, finding out from people, what they think is needed to make a difference. And I think there is that fine balance between being, asking the questions to really how you can improve as an organisation, but then really being mindful that if you've only got a small number of families from a diverse community within your organisation, that you're not constantly asking those questions and, and making people feel uncomfortable. So I think that is something that we all kind of need to be aware of, but not, I suppose, not using that to stop, that work as well, because some people really are happy to help you to develop as an organisation to become more inclusive.
I think context is really important as well. It's worth separating out an incident like that in the shop into the person doing it, the behaviour, what's done, and then the person who's receiving that behaviour. So that person receiving the behaviour, if that happens to them, Sheila said, constantly, again and again, maybe in different shops, it's a constant reminder of not fitting in, of other expectations, of not. So it's that constant othering, that constant, and that's whether it's discrimination or hate or ignorance. I'm less worried about how we name it. The key thing is let's support that person who's facing that situation. What can we do to make them more comfortable? And then how do we begin to change that behaviour? So it might be that reporting it as a hate incident, key thing to do, because a visit by an officer who just had a quiet word might be enough, or a chat with the manager might be enough to change them. And in the egg, I'm going to keep pushing the eggshells webinar today. In the eggshells webinar, we spend a lot more time looking at how can you gently challenge behaviour, particularly if it's motivated by ignorance. So at the end, our ultimate aim is to work with that person and kind of let them see where their assumptions are, what those underlying stereotypes are, and begin to change that. We change the person, we change the behaviour, and we've already supported the person targeted, but we ensure it is reduced or doesn't. That sounds really easy, but of course it's complex and ongoing. Are there any more questions? Okay, let's move on. I want to talk about a couple of really high-profile cases. And I'll go from left to right. Some of these you may have heard of, you may be aware of. Fiona Pilkington is quite a really some huge changes to the law on social care after Fiona killed herself and her severely disabled daughter, Francesca, had learning disabilities due to the stress, and this is her words, it was due to the stress and anxiety regarding her daughter's future ongoing antisocial behaviour. She had poured petrol over the back seat of her car, over the car, with her and her daughter in it, and then set a light to it. So that's how desperate she was. She'd reported 30 incidents of hate crime to the police over a 10-year period, and 13 in that last final year. The police and both social care had responded to individual incidents. They failed to see that overall picture. They failed to see the continuity, the consistency of what was going on for Fiona. And in the inquiry afterwards, one of the main failings, it was decided that one of the main failings was that it was never identified as hate crime. So it began to be, each incident was treated as an individual bit of antisocial behaviour rather than this coordinated hate crime. Unnamed vulnerable adult, we don't have the name. This is a woman who had been disclosing incidents from when she was a child. And it was initially decided that her mother could protect her. But then when her mother died, her abuser was allowed to become her carer. And she was forced to sleep on a carpet in the hall. They took her benefit money, they deprived her of food and water, made her sit in the dark for long periods. With 2 other people, her carer forced her to strip, shaved her head, sexually assaulted her, repeatedly stamped on her face and body. They eventually threw her over a fence, handcuffed her to a door and set fire to her clothing. Police, health and social services were aware of all the allegations of abuse since childhood, but they considered her to be an unreliable witness because she had learning disability. It had been going on for 20 years. When it was eventually fully investigated, they discovered that several people with learning disabilities had been sexually abused by the same group of people. The carer was eventually convicted and sentenced to 10 years, and another 2 got 7 years. Keith Philpert, in 2005, he had been tied, gagged, repeatedly beaten around the body and head, slashed with a knife and disemboweled while he was still alive. So the autopsy found him still alive while he was disemboweled. 2 men were convicted of his murder. It's thought that the motivation was that they believed he was having a sexual relationship with the investigating officer concluded that that wasn't the case. His family actually believed that that young woman was visiting his home in order to use his phone and run up huge phone bills. So there was financial abuse going on as well as this physical abuse. 8 months before his murder, Keith had gone to the police to say that he'd been threatened by them and that he was afraid to go out. Wasn't properly followed up. We come across Bijam Ibrahimi, and on if you Google him, you can hear there is a voice recording of some of his calls, which are really moving, heartbreaking. So he's an Iranian refugee who had learning difficulties, physical impairment. He was an incredibly quiet and polite man. Even on the phone calls to the police when he's facing horrific abuse, he's being incredibly polite. He was subjected to years of harassment and abuse from people on the estate where he lived. He was trying to move. He'd been ignored by the police, so he started to try and collect evidence. Young people who were gathering outside, taking photographs of it so that he could go to antisocial behaviour and then ask to be moved. And often antisocial behaviour teams say they need evidence in order to action. The police say they take action. On one occasion he was seen taking photographs and accused of taking photographs of someone's daughter, then accused of being a paedophile. He reported all of that to the police. The police arrived, so let me get this right. So, but the police responded really quickly to that initial phone call. When they arrived, there were 15 people outside his home, really angry, really shouting. They treated it as a... Rather than arresting any of the 15 people, they detained Bijan for a breach of the peace. And that's really hard to understand why. Well, it isn't hard to understand. That's what they did. They led him away. The crowd jeered and chanted and shouted at him as they led him away. Over the next 2 days, he contacted the police on several occasions. He was ignored, and the officer taking his calls just ignored, went off duty. And there's a recording of that last call. Well, eventually, Bijan was found unconscious. He'd been his body had been dragged outside and set light. So he was beat unconscious, I apologise, dragged outside and then set alight. Stephen Hoskins, someone with learning disability, for over a year he was exploited. People were taking his money, using his flat, essentially treating him as a slave, dragging him around his bedsit. Eventually he was tortured, made to falsely confess to being a paedophile. This group of young people forced him to swallow 7 painkillers, marched him to a viaduct and pushed him over, and as he was clinging on, they stabbed him. Shawi He, this is 2005. She was around 25 when she was murdered. She most likely had learning difficulty and disability, which hadn't been assessed. The body was found. When her body was found, there was extensive bruising all over, old knife wounds were hands, so defensive wounds were found. So that had been going on for a long time. A deep stab wound to her right elbow, which had clearly never received medical attention. Signs of infection. She was made to sleep outside of a shop. Police found copper piping and a broken broom, piece of wood with nails embedded into it. So all of these things have been used. According to the police, her injuries were horrific, and she'd clearly been tortured. This was a woman who'd come to the UK as the wife of essentially as a slave. She died from multiple injuries and hypothermia because she'd been forced outside in -4 degrees. These are really extreme, high-profile cases, but they start with those little things. So often it's about that false befriending, and there've been stories, people who have things called Thursday friends, people who turn up when the benefits arrive, go out, use up their money, then they're never seen again. People who use someone's house, and it can really escalate to cuckooing. It's like cuckooing, where drug cartels can use somebody else's house space to distribute drugs and other. Because it's in that person's house, that person, if these aren't careful, the person doesn't have enough support, they can end up being arrested and taking the blame for that activity. I think that's there's a lot to go in there. Can we go on to the next slide, please? And I just want to talk about why hate crime is different. And this is a quote from the Metropolitan Police. So in most crimes, it's something that the victim has in their possession or that they have control over that motivates the offender to commit the crime. They want your money, they want your car, they want something. With hate crime, it's who you are, who the victim is, or what the victim is. That's the motivation to commit that crime. So it's all about who that person is. Go on to the next slide. But there's a huge impact of hate crime. And the Crime Survey for England and Wales surveyed people who faced hate crime and people who faced other crimes. And they wanted to look at the emotional impact. So in the red, people who faced hate crime, and the blue is other crime. So people who reported that they were annoyed by the crime. Other crimes, it was higher. People facing hate crime, slightly lower. Angry, now this is a stronger emotion. People feeling angry is about the same. Shock. Shock that you're targeted by a crime is beginning to reduce. Shock that you're targeted by a hate crime is still staying quite high. This is because it's at them. who they are, fear after that crime, during and after that crime. The fear, because it's you, it's not what you've got, there's nothing you can do about your identity or who you are. So the fear stays with people much longer. And then we begin to talk about long-term conditions like anxiety. People facing hate crime report higher levels of anxiety, longer periods, difficulty, so it translates into difficulty sleeping, and loss of confidence. We're really talking about long-term health, mental health, well-being issues here. So one more, depression. People facing hate crime are much more likely, twice as likely, to come out with long-term depression than any other form of crime. So there is this really long-term impact on hate crime, and that's why it's so important. And when we go back to that question about a shopkeeper not giving you change, if that happens to you consistently in shops, we also begin to look at this long-term emotional impact. So the hate crime, discrimination, it's all beginning to come together and change how we are. Okay, so this is going to be an anonymous poll. I think maybe as there's not many of us, we can do it. We'll just do it if that's okay, rather than stay anonymous. So the first question is, if you've got those really good hands thingies, reactions, put up your hand, or you can put up your actual hand, if you have witnessed or faced or had a story of a hate crime disclosed to you. Have you seen hate crime in action? Someone told you about a hate crime? Have you been targeted? Those two, is that two people? Two people, okay. Of those people who have, did any of you report the hate crime? Take it as a no. Yeah, maybe three. Kerry, is your hand up for witnessing or for reporting?
No, sorry, witnessing, not reporting.
Okay. Yeah, and I've run this same question in a conference for people who are in the hate crime industry, whose job it is to report hate crime, to support victims. And it's true for them. People will have witnessed and seen, but the number of people who actually reported reduces. So why is it? What stops us reporting hate crime? Chat, unmute and make a suggestion. Why is it that why do we think hate crime is underreported? Maybe unmute.
Is it maybe because we feel that it's for the person who is the victim to decide if they want to report it, and maybe we feel a bit that we are sort of stepping into somebody else's choice?
That's a really good thought. Good reason. Yeah, I can see why that would kind of leave you unsure. There's a thing in the chat: fear, distrust of the police and authorities. Definitely. Any other ideas why we might not report?
Sheila's got her hand up.
Hi, yeah.
Sheila.
Hi, thank you. I think one of the recent ones, one of the family member had in depth told me about some of the experiences they had, which very much outlined hate crime, borderline. The person who was saying it kind of felt in the beginning that they had something's not right. But then the fear of losing the job and further sort of accusations of other not performing the job properly, or further pressures, or being accused of misunderstanding and perhaps more persecution from them, that kind of fear. Because this is a young person I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a student and a placement, all that to lose, to worry about. And I think how I supported it is by listening and sort of giving the confidence that the person is in the right to feel that way. I think one of the problem is people want to come to you to talk to see if they're imagining it, if they are over sort of being oversensitive, because people often get told you're being oversensitive at times about things. So checking whether they are thinking the right way, talking to the right person, and then not wanting to, the lady said that, not wanting to go further and report it is a fear of, but however, in this particular case, with that support that came from the university, from myself, the person got the confidence to raise the issue, but with a lot of support. And then along the way, wanted to withdraw it as well. Very much so. So that constant support, and that the person who's supporting has to be very solid to say, look, we are standing by you no matter what happens. I think that confidence is a big key, the support where it's coming from, because often that person felt that people will just put me in this position and move away. I can't deal with this, so it's that kind of situation. But it was resolved in the end. The person did apologize and eventually lost the job as well.
Right, wow. Absolutely, there's so much in that. So definitely, fear of reprisals. If it's in an organisation you're working in, definitely you could lose your job and your livelihood.
Yes.
If it's in your neighbourhood, there's a fear that if someone knows you've reported them, it's just going to escalate. And there's a bit in the chat there. Let me just go back up to it. That says fear. Sometimes people worry about making things worse for others as well. So that fear is all there. I really agree with Sheila when you said that. And it's really true that someone who's been targeted just needs to be heard, needs their story to be heard. And just knowing that somebody else is there and listening and supporting is a huge step. So never underestimate the role of listening. In the chat it says, let's see, I think this has been taught culturally by elders for many years. So that's the idea of not trusting, of not reporting. Is that right? Yeah. Sorry, Vanessa.
Sorry, yeah. No, I think obviously the types of hate crime that have probably happened how many years ago, I think with people's experiences, you pass those experiences down as you go through families, and that builds that kind of distrust to obviously where we are at today. I know that it is different now, and obviously breaking down those barriers is hard, but it's been done. But I think it's just when it's been taught culturally for so many years, it is a harder process to kind of.
Absolutely, yeah. And for good reasons. For some communities have been systematically ignored by the services that should be supporting them. So it takes a long time to regain the trust, and there's a lot of emphasis on the service needs to do the work to regain the trust of the community rather than the community turning around and trusting. So yeah, absolutely. That kind of what gets passed along through generations. Let's go to the next slide. But these are some of the reasons that have been given. Again, this comes from the survey of crime in England and Wales. So not knowing who to tell, not knowing how to report. Let's go through them quickly. The idea that there's so many incidents that I'd be reporting them all day. I know a number of disability groups who say exactly that. I report everything that happens to me. I'll be on the phone all day. Shame and embarrassment, that idea that either you've been vulnerable or even that you might believe that you are to blame. Just having the communication and life skills in order to report well. Not knowing, you don't want everyone to know. So sometimes it's such a personal thing, or you're not ready to reveal that part of who you are. Or mental or physical health just might not be in a place where you can take on that level of stress. Reprisal things getting worse. feeling it's not serious enough, don't want to bother. Now, sometimes the other side of it happens every day. If you're so used to it, or if you're used to really significant, difficult physical abuse and so on, you won't, the smaller things may not seem serious. You won't want to call them credible witness idea. No one's going to believe me in the services. Nothing will change anyway. Fear of involvement from and mistrust of agencies, and denial that it's happening. Yeah, that's a really self-protecting thing. To not want to be that vulnerable, to not want to be targeted, to be the target of a stranger, of someone. I just want to say, if someone gets to the point where they're reporting to the police, they're telling you about an incident that's happened to them, a hate crime, a hate incident, all of those barriers, all of those things have gone through their mind. They've gone through all these steps, or they eventually get to the point where they're confident enough to report. So it's never an easy thing to disclose a hate incident, a hate crime. I want to mention online hate. Well, 1 in 10 disability hate crimes happen online, and other hate crimes as well. Like, I don't have statistics for other hate crimes, huge numbers happen online. Now, online, there can be very poor or non-existent moderation. Lots of hate crime and abuse happens in those shared gaming portals, shared rooms where the chat is live. And it is just as damaging. So the hate online is just as damaging as in real life. And the rule of thumb is, if you can't say something in public, you can't say it online. Online is the public arena. And then if you want to take action, it all depends on where the send button been pressed. In the UK, if you press send in the UK, it comes under UK legislation. Press send and you're in the States, it comes under the United States legislation, and the US legislation is much, it allows a lot more hate. And there was a recent bit of legislation, the Communication Act in 2003, which kind of brings that all together, talks about social and so on. A couple of examples of online. I think what are we doing for time? I better speed up. On the left, Paul Hepplesworth, sentenced for 20 months and a 5-year restraining order. He took a video with him with a sword and a grenade, and really abusive towards Muslim communities. In the middle, Jay Davidson, to 4 years for inciting religious hatred. He said that he did it because he was incredibly drunk and doesn't believe those things. But the judge didn't. The judge said, even though you were really drunk, that tends to bring out your deeper underlying beliefs, sentenced him for 4 years. And on the end, Stuart Hampton was sentenced to 12 weeks for sending offensive emails. But it doesn't have to be that big stuff, weapons, offensive emails. And it would have got an 8-week sentence, but the hate element, so one of the benefits or one of the outcomes of it being a hate crime is that you get a sentence uplift. So it went from 8, any other motivation would have been an 8-week sentence. Because it was a hate motivation, it was increased to 12 weeks. I'm going to be really quick on the legislation, then we can have a quick break, I think. So there's lots of legislation that covers hate crimes, starting with the Public Order Act that says it's an offence to intentionally stir up hate on the grounds of race, religion and sexual orientation. The Protection from Harassment Act. So an individual act may not be a criminal offence, but that individual act is repeated, it can become harassment. So that can be if I say one thing abusive, that may not be a criminal act. If I say it twice, it could well be considered harassment. Continue to say it lots of times and death harassment. Crime and Disorder Act creates racially and religiously aggravated crimes, doesn't it? Those are the only kind of crimes that stand by themselves. Criminal Justice Act creates this framework that gives that sentence uplift. So if something has a hate motivation, if it's a hate crime, judges can then look at the normal sentencing guidelines, and then they can add time or an increased fine to that hate element to it. Disability Discrimination Act extended, so that introduced things, requirements for public authorities to promote equality of opportunity for disability. Disabled people, eliminate harassment. Equalities Act tried to bring everything together. Did in some ways. Public Order Act was about amending that stirring up hatred, and included now hatred on the grounds of sexual orientation. Interestingly, there isn't stirring up hatred on disability. Antisocial behaviour and Crime and Policing Act introduced lots of, I'm going to talk about this in a moment, lots of tools that the antisocial behaviour teams could use to intervene really early on. And one of the reasons I'm going over these different acts is to say that it all happened really piecemeal. So there isn't consistency across the different characteristics. So, so if you stir up hatred on the grounds of race, religion, and now sexual orientation, you can take that to the police. Police can act. Stir up hatred on disability or any other personal characteristic, which is kind of doesn't feel right, but it's been a really difficult. There are political issues where they haven't kind of all evened out. The good news is, if something doesn't break the law, there's still lots of things that we can do. Antisocial behaviour. Next slide. I'm wondering if so we can either take a break now, and then I'll talk about tools that antisocial behaviour teams can do, or if you're happy to do that slide and we can take a break after that. I just want to get a sense of how you're all feeling. Are you exhausted? Are you break's only going to be 10 minutes as well. I'm not that nice. What's the thought? Break? Thumbs up for a break. Thumbs down for let's do the antisocial behaviour. So that's a really judgmental action. People aren't saying things, so should we take the 10-minute break?
Yeah, yes. Let's do that. Thank you.
Sheila, is that a hand up from now or from before? Is that a new hand?
Mine, it's from before.
Oh, right.
All right, thanks.
Okay, it is 11:05. So can I ask it to be a 5-minute break? Because I'm way over.
Yeah, that's quick. That would be great.
Yeah. So if we can come back at 11 minutes past 11, because it's turned 6 past 11. Okay, I'll just give people another minute. Okay, brilliant. Welcome back. Right. I'm going to skip this video just for time reasons, but you'll get the links in the slide pack. It's well worth. It's a 10-minute video online, well worth watching. And I'm not going to give you time to reflect either. I'm going to suggest that ask questions as we go along. So absolutely, if you've got a question, if something comes up, unmute and just ask it. Put it in the chat. It's that interaction that makes the webinar much better than me just giving you 5 minutes for questions. And really quickly, reasons to report. Escalation, definitely. If someone gets away with it once, they're much more likely to continue to do something, and then if they're continuing, it's much more likely to get more severe. It's going to getting the data to improve legislation, knowing what's happening, knowing if there's hotspots. Often the police say, if you get a bit of harassment at a bus stop, and they get that report, and then they might get a report further down the road of something else happening, they can begin to track that person and their journey, and they can find out where they are and who they are. So, and then hotspots means they can focus their resources. And if it happens in an organisation, it means an organisation can take action around it. How to report. So this is the really important bits. Next slide, please. So a couple of ways on how to report. You can go directly to the police. If it's an emergency, if something's happening, if you're in danger, you have to ring 999. There's no other immediate emergency service. If you want, if you're not in danger, you can ring the 101, or you can approach an officer or go into a police station and report. So that's reporting at a police station. Remember what I said about officers may come across one or two hate crime incidents in their career and less likely to recognise disability. Definitely will recognise. On the other side, you can report to the police online. So it's a really easy form to fill in. And the good thing about the online reporting is that you have an option to report social media or online hate. And if you choose the online hate, the social media option, that goes to a social media hub based in London. It's a team of police who specialise in tracking down online hate and taking action on it, and can often get people off Facebook and so on. And if you take online hate to your local station, you're less likely to get a response, where you're less likely to find someone who knows how to deal with online hate. So I'd always, if you're reporting online, use that True Vision online bit. And in the middle, there are a number of third-party reporting services. Now, most social housing and most councils, or all councils, should have a way of reporting hate crime to them. Always name it as a hate crime, just in case. They may not recognise it. They may not ask you what the motivation is, even though they should do. Stop Hate UK is a national service, but it's only commissioned in, it's not commissioned in every area. So you have to check if your area is covered. And you'll get some really good people on the helpline there who will spend time to listen to that story and go through your options, who you can report to and ways you can report to. Al Mama is national and it specialises in Islamophobic hate crime. Catch is a great organisation. It's a collection of organisations that works across London. You can report hate crime if you're based in London to Catch. They also provide advocates, people facing hate crime, but not hate incident. Has to break the law. There are a number of local agencies around the country. So lots of places have their own hate crime specialist service, or agencies like victim support that will know what to do with that. When you report, can we go back, please, just another. So when you report a hate crime, you've got lots of options. So I know previously we said if you witness something, it's the other person's. So you have an option to report that incident anonymously. You can say this happened in this place, but not name who it happened to. And that way, there's some information there. It's part of a hotspot. If someone is doing multiple things, police and social behaviour might collect all that information and just see what's going on. So you always have that anonymous option. People who are targeted by hate crime have that anonymous option too, and that can help to reduce some of that fear of repercussion. When you report, mention it's a hate crime. Say what the motivation was. You don't have to provide evidence at that stage. You just have to mention it be monitored. will be investigated, and if there's an action taken, that's when the police need evidence. If action's taken by the antisocial behaviour team, that's when evidence is needed. You should be told about a number of different support services. Will include victim support. If there's a hate crime advocacy service in your area, it should include them. If you go to the police, they should tell you to talk to antisocial behaviour teams as well. And then depending on your area and depending on the nature of the hate crime as well, there are various services across the country, and too many for me to kind of go over. But I am quite happy if you're supporting someone with a hate crime and you're not quite sure what to do, I'm happy to take a phone call and if there's anything I can suggest. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'll leave that there and we'll come back to what else to expect. Things that antisocial behaviour teams can do. I'll do this really quickly. Try and do this really quickly. Most of us are aware of injunctions, so that means putting restrictions on someone coming near you or going to a certain place, and that's the most common thing. A CPN, Community Protection Notice, will be put into place even if a crime, even if there isn't a conviction for an incident. But if they put in a CPN and that CPN is then broken, that becomes a crime. But that's a way of escalating action on somebody. The CBO, behaviour order, only happen when there is a conviction for an offence. Closure order is about closing down a space. So often if someone is having their home abused, people coming in using their stuff, put a closure order on that house, which will then dictate who is allowed in that house and who isn't. So that can be, and you don't need, the good thing about closure orders is that it's not criminal law, so you don't need solid evidence for it. So housing can apply for a closure order because someone has said this is going on. They've got to have a reason to believe it is needed. Dispersal order kind of is what it sounds like, making sure that groups of people can't gather in a certain place, public space orders. I want to talk about the absolute grounds of possession. This is a really powerful one. So if there's someone perpetrating hate crime who's within social housing, then it would be in their contract not to be in breach of their contract. If they continue to crime, housing can apply for absolute grounds of possession. They can evict that person. It means they will essentially move that person, find them housing somewhere else. And often it ends up being the victim who has to apply to be moved. And it's the victim who has to give up their life and change location. And we much prefer, we want it to be the perpetrator rather than the person targeted. And on that website, Resolve UK, loads of information about antisocial behaviour teams. I'm putting this up there to say, and there are all these options before things become a criminal offence. And even before these options, there's this next slide where we can try out a whole host of things like mediation, acceptable behaviour orders, good neighbour agreements, informal warnings, so doorstep conversations, getting those local constables to just stop at someone, to a neighbour, and say, if you continue this behaviour, it's going to escalate. And to make sure that the neighbour knows that the police are aware of it. Written warnings, noise monitoring, parental agreements, community conferences. Community conferences, getting a whole community together to decide what's best for that community. Have I missed something? Is there another button to click? Oh, all right, just go back. There's one thing that's not on this slide, and that's if this crime or incident keeps happening and you're not happy with the support you're getting from antisocial behaviour team or housing or any other team of the police, if you report 3 incidents within usually 6 months, you can then escalate it to a community trigger, which means it's a multi-agency meeting. It kind of goes up in terms of management levels, and they're looking at what's happened. Have we dealt with this incident properly? So anyone can escalate to a community. That's always really worth knowing if you're not feeling happy with the service that you're providing. Some areas will also have hate crime barracks, the agency meeting on hate crime, which is another way of escalating and getting real multi-agency cooperation to deal with the situation.
Derek, can I just ask a question? You were talking about, the community police going in and maybe giving a warning initially. I mean, community policing is reducing, and we don't see the police in the local communities like we used to. In reality, does that happen? And how effective is it if people don't see that police presence in their local community?
Well, it is reducing. In reality, it will be one of the volunteer officers rather than an officer. I think it depends on, there are too many factors in there, but you're right, it's not happening as much. And how effective it is depends on why it's happening. If it's happening out of ignorance, if it's happening because there's annoyance, then it's likely. If there's a deeply held something, then it's not really going to have an effect. And over lockdown, there's been a huge amount of tension between all neighbours. A big increase in hate crime between neighbours. Often it's not been reported as hate crime; it becomes antisocial behaviour stuff. And and probably just having a quiet word wouldn't have been enough. But then a quiet word with a acceptable behaviour agreement might be enough, because if you then break the acceptable behaviour agreement, you can then escalate it a little bit more and a little bit more. So you're kind of edging towards making it an offence, and then something can happen. But with lockdown, things have taken a long time. Everything's just taken a long time to put into place.
I think just to add in there as well, one of the things that we're noticing is that there tends to be the local online groups as well. So when you think of Facebook, and sometimes that's not on your immediate doorstep, it's quite widespread. But now we're seeing more of these community groups. I mean, we've got one, and so if you see something on there and that escalates, that's really close to home then as well, isn't it? So then you've really got the combination of both.
One of the difficult things about online hate is that if someone starts something, often people begin to add to it, and so it can grow, it can escalate. It has that kind of echo chamber effect really quickly. So either reporting it can begin to stop it, but there are also ways of kind of starting a counter narrative in that thread. So saying something that counters that negative statement, so that we're now trying to escalate a positive around that. It's a bit of an art in itself. It'll not be too judgmental. Sometimes humour is a great way of narrative. Yeah. So how do we support someone? So remember, they've gone through all those barriers just to disclose, just to get the confidence to say something. So as we said before, first thing is just to make time to listen and believe. Very much like a safeguarding. It's that same thing. The first thing we want to do is support the person who's been targeted. We're listening to the story, listening to what happened, believing them. That means being non-judgmental in everything they say. Essential. And there's a huge amount of research say that first step makes a huge difference in how someone feels about the whole process. Going through those options. So it might be that reporting anonymously, reporting directly, reporting to a third party might help. Reporting to, if it's within an organisation or college, there might be ways that way. And just having someone to talk through all those options. It's worth remembering as well that there are so many reasons why someone might not want to take it further. And it might be because it happens all the time. They haven't got the energy to focus on it, and it's such a negative thing to focus on. And I want to encourage you to take a gentle approach to reaching a balance between what they want and finding a way of reporting it so that it's named, so that this issue isn't invisible, and named within an organisation, named within an area, named in some way, so that we get a view of what's really happening. So what can you do as an organisation to support the person targeted? I just want to, sorry, if we go back really quickly, I know time's an issue. Recording the incident appropriately, you might want to, you want to give them your full attention while they're talking, but you might want to make time to write things down immediately afterwards, so you don't forget anything, and writing it down is really essential, especially if you're taking it further in terms of a report. And interventions we'll talk more about in the eggshells thing, I think, but finally keeping people informed, staying with someone throughout that journey to give them that support. And I think that's everything that you had said earlier. Next one, please. So I've got some case studies. Just before I do mine, I wonder if it's worth asking if there are situations that people have seen, faced, that you'd rather talk about, you'd like to discuss now. Or I can use my case studies that are kind of based on incidents. Does anyone want to raise something you faced, or something that's ongoing, something that you're not sure of? Potential incident? Sue? You're so muted.
Yeah, I hit the unmute, but it didn't work. It's a while ago, because my son's 25 now, but we live in the Netherlands, and when we first moved over and he started at school, he was telling me he was being bullied, and he didn't speak any Dutch at the time. I went in to talk to the teacher about it when I took him in, and she kind of looked surprised but didn't really say anything to help. And as I went out, I saw someone get hold of him and push his head down and hold his head down on the desk. Another 5-year-old doing this to him, even though I'd just spoken to her. You'd think she'd at least be keeping an eye on him. Then about a week later, they shared teachers, and they do a lot of sharing of a job in the Netherlands. And they said, oh, he'd had an accident. And so I said to the teacher, well, was it an accident? And she said, well, what do you mean? So I said, well, I've come in to explain he's being bullied, and no one said anything about it. And so then she really looked into it and spoke to some of the other children, and it had been done on purpose. What they did is one of them had tripped him, pushed him down on the floor, and then another child went over him with a car, with those little tight cars, and he had a massive kind of bruise and scratch. I think he had a scar, deep scratch. He may even still have a scar now on his back. And when I was trying to find out more about it, apparently a lot of the grandparents were complaining about so many immigrants coming in and taking away different kind of money for other children. And the children, because he didn't speak English, didn't speak Dutch at that time, felt that we were someone's coming in taking away services, which we weren't. But even if we had been, well, it wouldn't have, but it was just the fact that it was only the second teacher that took the trouble to believe me and actually do something. And she said the other teacher hadn't even told her. So they then took it much higher within the school, because that should never have happened. If this other teacher didn't want to deal with it, well, she had to, because it was happening in her class on her watch type of thing. But we have had different kind of things, not as being hit like he was that time and pulled down and stuff, but living here, some people do resent the fact that we're not Dutch.
Oh yeah.
So, but obviously it's not quite the same as what's been happening that you've been talking about in any way. But it is, our sort of our experience. And at first, I thought my other son was bullied as well, but back in the UK, and also beaten up at one point. But that wasn't particularly. That was just because he was trying to defend someone else, and they turned on him.
The majority of hate incidents is the kind of lower level. It's not those extreme cases that I spoke about. It's lower level stuff. If it goes unchecked, it begins to escalate. So I would say I can't speak about schools in the Netherlands, but if that incident had happened in the UK, I think you've done the right things. Going to the teacher, you would expect a better response from the teacher, but then the next step would be going to the deputy head or the head. I would. So what I would be saying to someone in the UK is there's also an option of getting a third party to write to the school. Say, this has happened. We identify it as a hate incident, hate violation, and would expect the school to act. If you had an advocate working with you, or if you had the time and energy, the schools have the bullying policy online, so you could look at what that is and make sure they're following that. They would also have an equal ops policy as well. Definitely, the longer it takes to get a response that you're happy with, the kind of higher you have to go, and you can go to head teachers, and you can go to I want to say trustees. That's the wrong word. Governors, school governors, and always the idea of bringing in a third party. It's such a powerful thing. So I've often written letters. When I was working for Stop Hate UK, I would write a letter on headed paper. Stop Hate UK. It was a summary of the incident, and if it lands on the head teacher's desk, take notice of it and begin. Plus, if it's happening for one person, it's happening for a lot of people, and that school needs to really address that issue.
Going back to my son in the UK, I say it wasn't. It was just bullies. But when we weren't getting anywhere, because I said, don't you realise you can harm him? And they said, oh, it's only fun, kind of thing. Because somebody came and got me, and I managed to run over while it was still happening, and then said I've called the police. I hadn't, but I just that made them run off, and I caught one of them, and so I said, well, I am going to report it to the police. I said, because if you don't believe it's you're doing any danger, then to any harm, then I'm going to report it. So I reported it to the police. The school never bothered at all. We actually managed to move him on appeal. We managed to get him into another school, but the police said, oh, it's just he probably antagonized them, and which he hadn't. He just gone to his friend's defense when they grabbed his bike. But victim support did call me. So although the police weren't helpful at all, making out it was his fault to him when he was only 11, which I thought was really mean, victim support did get in touch. And in fact, the lady, I'd been on a course with her, so she recognised, she said, Sue, is that Sue? You got little Nathan? And I said, yes, that's me. And she actually sorted out that he went to a kind of after school club once a month, once a week, I think it was. And they picked him up, and it was to build up his confidence again, which I thought was wonderful. I say he's 33 now. This was when he was 11, so it's a while back. But victim support really did come.
Okay, right. Kerry, you've put a thing in the chat. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, all I want, this is a role that sometimes we play as a patient organisation as well. So sometimes families just need that extra person in there to support, really. So I'd like Derek was saying about that third party. I mean, when we have got family support, do that kind of outreach work, and sometimes all it takes is a phone call, just to say, actually, families, reported this is something that we're quite concerned about. Can you share your policies with us? Can we work together to see how we can escalate this and help resolve this for the family? And just by sometimes having somebody else from outside, so it's not from the school, not the parent or family, but really looking in on this, sometimes it can just help things to move along a little quickly. And I think it's just, not all families need that, but it just gives that bit of a confidence that somebody else is on their side and going to taking this seriously and helping them to get it resolved.
It's worth thinking about the needs of that child who's doing the act. There are underlying needs. There are reasons why they're doing that. They're behaving in that way, and so beginning to address some of the assumptions that they hold, but also kind of addressing some of those needs. Really important too, because they're children. Any other incidents, things we want to discuss? It's 11:38, so I've gone over already. So I just want to get permission. Do we want to? I can round up really quickly. We can go for another 10 minutes. Consensus.
I'm happy to keep going for 10 minutes if everybody else is.
I'll put it as a yes. And if you do need to leave, just leave. That's fine. And this last bit will be recorded so you can catch up. So, are there any other things, incidents, questions people want to raise or ask? I'm going to quickly go through what this case study. So you've got so Mrs. C, your friend, tells you about her neighbour's children, and throwing rubbish into her garden to try and trip her up. So the first question is this a hate crime? Is this a hate incident? What can we do about it? So chat or unmute?
I think on the information that's there, we don't know if it's a hate crime yet. There's not enough information. It could just be kids having a prank, as they often do. But I think if we knew more information about Mrs. C and the situation, then that might change. Completely.
What is it we need to know?
Well, their reason for doing it. Who is she? Where's she from? Why are they doing it? Is it something that is this the first occasion, or is this something that's been going on for a long time with other incidents? So there's probably quite a lot more that we need to know, really.
So there's a note in the chat from Mel. It's about perception, but the first step is, what does she think the motivation is? And if she thinks it's to do with or whatever, race, religion, disability, then we put the hate motivation and report it as a hate incident or a hate report, a hate crime. But that doesn't mean we take action against the children. It means we support her and then we begin to investigate. So if we click to the next line. So imagine she says, she's blind. They're doing it so they know that she'll struggle to navigate, trip her up. And now what if, one too many? What if instead of it being rubbish, it's glass? Does this make a difference?
Yeah, because it's really dangerous as well as the emotional impact and everything like that. It's the tripping up. It's the danger of the damage it could cause as well if it's glass.
So both reportable, both should be reported because it begins to build up that evidence. But I want to make it really clear: it's not about criminalising children. So it could be reported anonymously. It could be reported without naming the children. It's not about criminalising, but it is about getting information, gathering information, and then seeing if there's a conversation maybe with the parents. And then especially as it's glass, the danger is escalating. Yeah, possible intention to harm. Can we click on the next one? So actually, it's not the children, it's the neighbour themselves doing this. What would we do? What are our options? How can we stop that neighbour? Think back, you won't have, be hard to remember, but if you can think back to all the different options within antisocial behaviour, there are things from having a conversation with her to setting good neighbourhood agreements. So lots of things that can be done before it gets to it, before we even involve the police. That's the way we want to go. The glass makes it really, the decision to involve, the glass might make the decision to involve the police more important, more necessary. Can we click on the last one? So the neighbour agrees not to do it again. But every time Mrs. T is in the garden, they begin to sing that song, I love the sound of breaking glass. So what's happening now? Is this a hate crime? Is it a hate incident?
I would say so. And I worried a bit at the part where it said it's not the neighbour, it's the child, it's the neighbour. And I think one of the things, you know, the comment we made before about the fear of making things worse. And I think that's what would worry me there. If it was an adult doing that, I think for children, you can, you know, you kind of maybe rationalise that, thinking, oh, this could be kids, and you know, maybe if we have a word with the parents, they can stop this. But actually, if it's an adult doing that act, my concern about fronting that or encouraging somebody else to confront the neighbour about that would be the what comes next. And I think that at that point, that's where I would be suggesting getting other people involved.
Yeah. Message in the chat. Oh, it says becoming psychological harm without leaving evidence. Absolutely. And if it happens repeatedly, if it happens more than once, it's harassment and it can be taken to the police. The challenge is collecting evidence for it. And this is based on this is based on someone I was supporting when I was at Stop Hate UK. And her challenge was collecting evidence of the neighbours singing. Which is possible. And you can go, and there are things that antisocial behaviour team can do without a lot of evidence, but they have to be really supportive with it. So I've put this in because there wasn't a clean-cut solution to this. We were encouraging her to install things like the video doorbells and things like that, or a video camera that would collect it. You can't film the neighbour's garden. Okay, can we go quickly look at the last one, the next one? Your colleague is constantly mixing up the names of the only 2 Asian volunteers in the team. This is a hate crime. Okay, what's the impact of this? How are those volunteers going to feel? Someone's going to have to speak. Go on, Sheila.
I've been thinking hard. This is actually directly I've experienced this. I mean, myself, my name, and other members of the staff. On one point in my life, one of the experiences was that this person wouldn't take any of these Asian people's names accurately. So either they'll give them another name, or change the sound of the name, or mix the spelling, but it will never be accurate. And at some point, it was also a completely different name given to the person. This was initially, it sounded funny because people thought it was funny. then it was given as if this person can't remember, it's got bad memory. But when looked at it in depth, turns out to be that it was mainly Asian names which were not any other names. So then it was no longer funny anymore because it wasn't across board. How did we deal with it? I think nobody actually dealt with it. Everybody just took it. It's okay, you know. So it was a difficult one to say that this person is actually deliberately doing it, or they have lack of respect or lack of value for the other people. It was felt, but I think, including myself, although I many times felt I wanted to kind of bring it out and talk about it, I wasn't able to. So it was a difficult one. I found that one quite a challenging one. Couldn't find a way to deal with that one. Yeah.
This is definitely, so it could be that kind of unconscious microaggression thing. It's repeated and keeps going on. It could be a very conscious discriminatory thing. If it's repeated again and continues, it could even become harassment. So it can be somewhere on that spectrum of discrimination, microaggression, discrimination, hate incident, hate crime. If we look at it and we separate out the different elements, the person doing it, behaviour, and the person being targeted, the impact on them, we want to ensure that's such a negative impact on someone. That's telling those volunteers that you're not important, you don't count, I don't respect you, I respect you so little, I can't be bothered to learn your name. And so you want to support them and get them to a place where they're in an organisation where they're fully respected. So, and this is based on a true story as well. And in this instance, it was dealt with internally. So there was an internal kind of informal complaint raised, an informal discussion. The person used those arguments that it was a joke. I can never remember their names. It was handled really well. So they began to talk about the impact on the volunteers. And if you then begin, we'll do this more in the eggshells thing, begin to work with that person and the behaviours, so they begin to empathise about the impact, begin to realise that what they're doing isn't such a small thing after all. And so we then begin to change that individual doing it. So in that case, it went kind of through informal ways. They realised what they were doing. They were on the verge of getting a formal warning. If they continued it, they would have been a formal action. And they changed. And they apologized.
Can I just respond to that? I think that's very good advice, what you've said and how to do it. I think it's just that in the moment, I think you kind of, and the other thing that I didn't say was this person was in a position of authority. So again, that was quite challenging as well to how to address somebody above you. So
the next button, Catherine, it's exactly that. Go again. I think it's the implications of your actions. Is it different if they're a carer over here in client? Is it different if you're a manager? And power dynamics are really essential, really important. And in the eggshells thing again, it's sometimes you want to address something there and then, but you have to be in a really good place to do that. You have to be calm yourself to be able to do that. You have to practice how you're going to do it before you can address an incident in the moment. And often you need to just come away from it, work out what you want to do, how you want to do it, how you're going to say it, and then do it. And if any of you have been involved in things like mediation or non-violent communication or that kind of bringing together conflict resolution, it's those similar skills. It's getting down to using non-judgmental language, really hard to do, and then raising the issue. I think I probably need to leave it there unless there are any final questions.
Mel's got a hand up.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna. It was just an observation, really, that sort of that sometimes people purposely teeter on the boundaries of what might be able to be dismissed as, oh, I didn't mean it, and they do that purposely, knowing that they can be sort of abusive towards somebody, but that they won't report it because it might sound a little bit silly. So I think sometimes people do that purposely. They make a decision to just teeter on the boundaries of what they can get away with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think using informal means to discuss. I think the first thing is always to support the person who's facing that situation. So that ideally there's a place they can go to talk about it, even if they can't take action. But support that person. Look at informal ways of supporting that person. And if this is within an organisation, I get that sense that's what you're talking about. If it's within an organisation, it is about organisational culture. It's about how do you have those conversations safely? How can you raise things safely so that someone can admit that they're on this edge or accept that they've made a mistake without feeling, what's that word, that they've done something wrong or that they're going to be punished for it. So it's the idea of being allowed to make a mistake and learn from it and grow and change and kind of create that culture in an organisation. It's hard.
I think that's a really important point that you've raised there, Derek, and that's what I was just about to say, really, in terms of organisational culture. You know, we work in patient organisations. We're all seen as, you know, a caring environment, and we're there for the best interests of the people that we're there to support. But actually, I think sometimes what organisations don't always recognise is that need to support within as well, and supporting staff within an organisation that are doing this work. And I suppose having that open dialogue where it's not, you know, having conversations with staff, it's not just about the work that staff are doing, but actually how do they feel about the work that they're involved in, how are they settling into the team, how do they get on with their colleagues, and having that open dialogue and building that trust, I think, between team members, and also, you know, encouraging people to talk about how they feel others are, you know, getting on in the team. I think, you know, do they feel that there are any concerns, and having that, you know, opportunity where people feel that they can not necessarily knock on the door, but send an email, pick up the phone, you know, to share any concerns like that, and that's, but then trusting that that's going to be responded to appropriately. So I think, you know, it comes back to the culture within that organisation as well. And, you know, and I'd really advise you all to, you know, to pick up the phone and speak to Derek on an individual basis as well, you know, to help you, to support you with things like that.